What really happened to Max Verstappen at Silverstone that made him give up the championship? What seemed like just a bad race actually exposed an internal crisis at Red Bull that no one had counted on. Do you think Verstappen is thinking about leaving Red Bull? Let us know in the comments. Is Red Bull losing control just when Verstappen needs it most? In this video, we're going to reveal everything the cameras didn't show about Verstappen's devastating race at the 2025 British GP and how it could affect his future. Red Bull had configured the RB21 with an extreme approach, downforce levels so low that they had only been used previously at circuits like Monza, where pure straight-line speed is key. This strategy made sense if the conditions were dry. The problem was that all of this depended on the weather, and Silverstone, as is often the case, didn't promise stability. Despite this, Red Bull decided to go with that setup because until Saturday, the forecast indicated that the rain would be light and fleeting. According to Verstappen, everything changed overnight. This detail is crucial. The team didn't react in time to the change in weather. Even with pole position in the bag, the decision to maintain that configuration for the race was a move that many describe as technical blindness. What began as a strategic advantage ended up becoming a tactical trap. And Verstappen, instead of starting with an advantage, started with a car that simply couldn't handle in wet conditions. Silverstone doesn't forgive mistakes like that. It's not only one of the most demanding circuits on the calendar due to its extremely high average speed, but also due to its unpredictable weather. A car with low downforce can fly in the dry, but when water enters the field, grip disappears. That was exactly what happened to Verstappen. He started Sunday with a virtually uncontrollable car. From the first lap, it was clear that the race pace was nothing like Saturday's. What seemed like a strategic advantage turned into a constant struggle to keep the car on the track. The most striking thing is that, despite having an unstable machine with no grip, Verstappen managed to stay in the top 5 for much of the race. This speaks to his skill as a driver, but also to the physical and mental strain he was experiencing in the cockpit. Every corner was a battle. Every wet section of a circuit amplified the setup errors. And meanwhile, the rest of the paddock was beginning to understand that something was seriously wrong with the RB21. On Sunday, the race began with palpable uncertainty. The threat of rain had been confirmed the night before, but Red Bull stood by their game. They opted not to significantly modify the RB21 setup, despite the already clearly unfavorable conditions. It was a high-risk gamble, based on the hope that the track would remain dry enough for the low downforce to be an advantage. But from the first lap, it became clear that this hope was a miscalculation. Max Verstappen, a driver who rarely complains without reason, began reporting problems from the very first laps. The car spun, didn't respond as it should, and every corner posed a constant threat of losing control. This wasn't a minor adjustment out of place. It was a head-on battle against a car that simply wasn't designed for the weather they were facing. Instead of adjusting the strategy to the new context, Red Bull decided to maintain its initial approach, which left its driver in an indefensible position. The consequences were quickly apparent. Straight-line speed, which should have been one of his greatest advantages, was of no use when the RB21 couldn't brake or corner with confidence. The car lacked grip in critical areas of a Silverstone layout, particularly in high-speed corners like Copse, Maggots, and Beckett's. There, where competitive pace is defined on the circuit, Verstappen simply couldn't fight. One of the most revealing phrases of the race was heard on Verstappen's radio. "I'm so slow, I can't even keep up with the others." It wasn't an isolated cry of frustration. It was a stark declaration from a world champion trapped in an ill-prepared car. In that moment, the distance between the driver's talent and his team's decisions was completely exposed. Red Bull didn't just leave him vulnerable, they left him exposed. Silverstone was simply the moment when the pieces stopped fitting altogether. The car became uncompetitive not because of a lack of speed, but because of poor decisions from the outset. What was thought to be a brilliant move from Saturday ended up being a trap of their own making. Verstappen, in the midst of that strategic storm, maintained his composure as much as he could. But even his patience has its limits. And he made it clear at the end of the race, when he said he was no longer thinking about the championship. Those words, coming from such a competitive driver, are not a simple declaration. They're a warning sign, a direct message to his team, and perhaps to the rest of the paddock. The tension was already evident from the first third of the race, but everything exploded on lap 21. Silverstone, with its wet asphalt and treacherous conditions, became the scene of one of the most revealing moments of the weekend. Just after the safety car restart, when the field compacted and the margins for error were reduced to zero, Max Verstappen experienced an instant that would completely change his race and perhaps his perception of the team. On the hangar straight, Oscar Piastri, who was just in front, suddenly slowed down. The maneuver was aggressive enough to force Verstappen into instant evasive action. It was a split second, but at that moment, with a wet track, tires at their limits, and a car setup completely unsuitable for those conditions, that split second was enough to cause chaos. Verstappen's reaction was immediate. Over the radio he exploded. "Whoa, mate, he's suddenly slowing down," he shouted with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. It was a well-founded complaint. Race direction quickly acted, issuing Piastri a 10-second penalty for dangerous driving. But for Verstappen, that penalty had no immediate value. What he had lost was much more than track position. Control of the car slipped through his fingers. In a critical maneuver, just after the incident with Piastri, Verstappen lost the rear of the RB21, spun around, and went completely off the ideal line. He didn't crash. There was no contact. But that mistake, forced by the previous incident, momentarily dropped him from the points. This seemingly isolated moment became symbolic of everything that went wrong at Silverstone. A prior strategic error, a misreading of the conditions, and an on-track incident that ultimately unraveled an already complicated race. Verstappen, accustomed to leading, was forced to come from behind. With an unstable car, amidst climatic chaos, and the pressure of representing a team that has had it all and now seems to be losing its way. Pierre Watch, Red Bull's technical director, put it bluntly after the race. The car suffers from a corner entry problem that compromises the car's overall handling. That phrase, so specific and technical, captures a reality that's more serious than it seems. Because if the car doesn't enter corners well, the driver loses confidence. And when that confidence disappears, especially in changing conditions like those at Silverstone, the car becomes a constant threat. Added to this is another, even more worrying factor. Not even the engineers seem to agree on exactly where the fault lies. Christian Horner, ever the diplomat, tried to downplay the issue, but ended up admitting that it's a fundamental aerodynamic problem. That, in the current context of Formula One, is a dangerous statement. Because when the problem is at the base of the design, there's no immediate fix. Concepts need to be redesigned. And that, in the middle of the season, is almost impossible. Verstappen's comments were also revealing. During free practice, he was heard on the radio complaining about the brake balance, saying it was so extreme it felt like he was activating a handbrake. These aren't typical comments from a driver looking for a minor adjustment. They're signs of deep frustration. From a driver who no longer feels comfortable, who is beginning to lose that instinctive connection with his car. And that, in a competitor like Max, is alarming. These technical details, which may seem minor to those who don't follow each race closely, are actually the factors that define a championship. It doesn't matter how much speed the car has on the straight line if it can't be controlled in the corners. It doesn't matter how many pole positions you get if you can't stay on track in the rain. And most importantly, it doesn't matter how good the driver is if the car doesn't inspire confidence. The most disturbing thing is that, after several updates and tests at different circuits, the problems remain. The feeling in the paddock is that Red Bull has reached a limit in its current development concept. While other teams are evolving, they seem to be going in circles. And the window to correct this is closing rapidly. This isn't the kind of problem that can be solved with a new front wing or a diffuser upgrade. What Red Bull is facing is a disconnect between what the car should do and what it actually does on track. After everything that happened at Silverstone, there's a feeling in the air. Something has changed in Max Verstappen. It's no longer just a failed race or a car that isn't up to par. It goes deeper. It's an internal transformation that began to be seen in his gestures, his voice, and especially in his words after crossing the finish line. The phrase that resonated most throughout the paddock was simple, yet devastating. "I'm not thinking about the championship anymore." That statement says it all. Because when the most dominant driver of recent years stops seeing the championship as his goal, it means he's lost something fundamental. Not the talent, nor the hunger for victory, but the confidence that his team can give him the tools necessary to keep winning. Until recently, Verstappen spoke of the title as an obvious, almost inevitable goal. Now, he faces it as if he were just another spectator. He says he's going to take each race as it comes, that sometimes it will go better and sometimes worse. It's a change in tone, but also in attitude. He's lowering his expectations. And that, for a driver like him, is never a good sign. The difference between fighting for a championship and simply competing is in the details. It's in the mindset you approach each weekend with. In the confidence that you can trust your car, your team, the technical decisions. When that breaks down, everything becomes more difficult. And that's where Verstappen seems to be now. Verstappen's words after the race were the clearest reflection of the moment he's going through. When a world champion openly declares he's no longer thinking about the championship, he doesn't do so out of resignation. He does so because he's reached a point where he no longer trusts the tools at his disposal. And that is, perhaps, the most alarming sign for any team, seeing its most valuable driver begin to emotionally disconnect from the project. There is no competitive car without trust. And right now, that connection between Verstappen and Red Bull seems weaker than ever. What's truly worrying for Red Bull isn't just that its car is failing. It's that solutions aren't coming. The RB21 has serious technical and structural problems, and each update implemented doesn't seem to provide the necessary leap to recover lost performance. Meanwhile, teams like McLaren and Mercedes are making steady progress. Formula One waits for no one, and if Red Bull doesn't react in time, the 2025 championship could slip away entirely, and what's even worse, they could lose their central figure. And this is where you, too, become part of this debate. So I want to know what you think. Should Verstappen stay at Red Bull, waiting for a recovery? Or is it time to look for a new challenge with another team? Leave me your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.